I don't actually have any real credentials. I'm a screenwriter. I went to school for film. And anime's always kind of been a big hobby of mine ever since I saw Ultraman when I was like 8 years old, and then moving on from then Gun Wing, which kind of spawned my mecha fandom. So I'm just on Sam's coattails, because he's the one who blogs and I just follow around.
I call him Seabear. So Mike, talk about yourself.
Alright, well, I've been writing about anime for 10 years, both for Anime Dream, and I now run Anime Herald, so definitely check me out afterwards. I'm going to be pretty much bombarding with anime Boston coverage once this weekend's over. Once I crash out and get some sleep, hopefully. But I'm just that crazy guy that started watching anime when I was like 4 or 5 years old and just never stopped. So I'm that person that's absolutely warped somehow, but somehow managed to grow up normal.
That's good.
All right, so we're going to get started, but before we get started, we'll take all questions at the end just because we do have a lot of content to cover and we want to make sure we get through all of it so you guys have an adequate amount of time for questions. So if you could just all hold those until the end. We have some fabulous prizes we'll give out for people who come up to ask questions.
Very fabulous prizes.
Yeah. No brand new cars this weekend, but they're still very nice.
All right.
All right, so I guess we should get started. Welcome, this is the Marvel vs. Capcom panel. Well. Alright, let's try it again. Welcome, this is the Marvel vs. Capcom panel. We're going to be discussing today, who's better, Ryu or Spider-Man? Ryu. Who says Ryu? Who says Spidey? Spidey wins. So let's get started. We're trying to keep this PG, guys, so 4-letter words are no.
You're only in America!
So anyway, this is East meets West, Sentai versus superheroes.
No.
I know, I'm already...
This panel is titled From East to West, the Superheroes of Japan and America. It sort of spawned from just a comparative look at, we live in America, we see Spider-Man, Captain America all the time, but as someone who reads a lot of manga, and we all watch a lot of anime, it's just interesting to sort of see the historical comparatives and how the superheroes fit in culturally and what they represent in both cultures. So we wanted to take the time to sort of do a walk through that, talk about what's going on currently, talk about really prominent characters and different movements in the past. So we're going to start out with pre-World War II Japan, and I'll turn that over to you, Mike.
All right, let's pretty much all, excuse me. Pretty much the idea of the Japanese superhero began with kamishibai, or paper drama, which was basically a traveling show. Storytellers would cycle a mini stage called a butai around from town to town, where they would show a combination of 3 different stories. Usually it was an action-adventure story for the boys and the girls, well, for the boys, drama for the girls, and something lighter and general interest to lighten the mood. Most of those ended in a cliffhanger to kind of encourage people to come back and keep seeing the guy and keep paying them.
They would do this on a daily basis, and it was how they made their money, so they really wanted kids to come back and get the story.
One of the biggest heroes for this era was Ogon Bat, or Golden Bat. He was pretty much the Japanese Superman. He was invincible, he could create, he had a staff that could create earthquakes, he could fly. He was pretty much Superman before Superman existed. He was probably enough to be made into a comic book by Osamu Tezuka in 1952. Wait, that is wrong, sorry. I actually don't have a date idea.
I don't have a date on the manga. He first appeared in 1931, 7 years before Superman came into America. A point Mike forgot to bring up is he's immortal. His sort of origin story is there was this little girl getting harassed by terrorists, and she cried. A tear fell on Ogun Bat, and he woke up. He was originally created as a protector of Atlantis. So as you can see, he's holding a little girl. He helps her out, and as Mike said, there was an anime associated with it, so we have the opening to that currently, or right now.
No sound.
We're having a few technical difficulties, guys.
Oh, no sound. That's fine.
1 second. We can't not have sound.
That's what we see really be believed, guys.
Am I not doing it right?
Sounds like
That's super weird. All right, we can put the mic up to the computer and create horrible feedback for everyone to listen to.
we do it for
See, there's
you.
feedback there.
Wait, hit play again. Let's just.
Like, flip it. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. We'll see how this goes.
All right, continue on.
Anyway, moving on, you can't get the sound to work. In World War II, Kamishiba was used as propaganda. They had features like Momotaro destroying their enemies, things like that going on. And it was generally used as an engine to motivate the people and get them ready for war. Unfortunately, the medium did begin to die out with the advent of TV, and by the 1950s, most of your Kamishibai writers and artists had moved to the anime and manga industries.
So, in addition to Kamishibai, there was one prominent hero in manga pre-World War II, and this is a super robot. He's described as a man in an iron ball. He's very similar to Doraemon in the sense that, say, he gets thrown into the water by his enemies, he can turn into a boat. If he needs to fly, he can sprout wings. He has machine guns, chains, what have you. His name is Tank Goro. He loves to fight. And he's a super robot that predates Astro Boy. So for all those of you who thought Astro Boy was sort of the crowning achievement of manga and robotics, you're wrong.
Big conqueror. My name is Fight!
So this is a recent collection put out by Pop Press. It's great if you're really interested in sort of the cultural history of comics and seeing how they evolve. The structure of it really isn't that good. There's a lot of splash pages with Tank Kuro saying like, oh, these octopuses are grabbing my butt. And soldiers saying ridiculous things. But it's a blast. It's a really great historical perspective because it started out similar to how American comics did as a newspaper strip and evolved further from that and just it's really wacky and fun. So if you have the chance, I would definitely recommend picking it up.
And now we'll move on to America. The first documented comic book superhero was The Clock, who appeared in Funny Picture Stories in 1936. He was created by George, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, Kremer. He paved the way for the vigilante genre of comics, which involves, like, say, Batman, a Punisher, stuff like that. Basically, he was a mass vigilante that would solve crimes. He'd leave a calling card whenever he dealt with some sort of person. It says something to the lines of "the clock has struck." I mean, it was fairly cheesy. It really didn't have much going for it, but it drew heavily from the pulp serials and the radio dramas, like say The Shadow, The Phantom, stuff like that at the time. And now we're getting to what people should remember: Superman, Man of Steel, eat double pies, poops American flags. He was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. He appeared in the first issue of Action Comics, and he was originally written to give voice to the young and disillusioned of the Depression era. Originally, he wasn't quite America, rah, 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 deal with the terrorists, deal with that. He was actually a much darker character. He dealt with things like social injustice. In particular, he dealt with worker rights, social reform, government assistance to the poor. So pretty much, in today's terms, he was a flaming commie. He was the industry's first real superstar. He created pretty much a huge jump in the market. He expanded the comics market by leaps and bounds, and people were just pretty much clamoring again. I think, if I remember correctly, there were issues of the spin-off Lois Lane with like Pat Boone in it at the time. So pretty much everyone wanted to be in Superman, everyone wanted to read Superman. It also led to a number of imitators of the format though, including Batman The Dark Knight himself by Bob Kane, who gave a more surreal, darker look that drew more heavily from comics like The Clock and pulp magazines, but still had some of the tropes that Superman had created. And then there was Captain Marvel, who was pretty much the wacky equivalent to Superman. He had much more whimsical, silly plots that weren't were kind of like almost a send-off of what Superman had been at the time. It actually outsold Superman for a short period. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the sales figures on that.
Yeah, for those of you not familiar with Captain Marvel, or as he's called now, Shazam, it's a story of a young
Still
kid.
called Captain Marvel.
They changed the name when they watched the new 52.
Blame Jeff Johns.
It was kind of confusing.
Semantics.
It was kind of confusing when Marvel had a Captain Marvel and DC had a Captain Marvel because you couldn't tell which one he wanted.
For those of you who aren't familiar with Captain Marvel, though, it's the story of a young boy, Billy Batson, who comes across this wizard who bestows a number of god-like abilities from him. His name is an acronym. Zeus is in there, some other ones. And every time he says Shazam, lightning hits him and he changes into Captain Marvel, affectionately known to the public as the Big Red Cheese.
As we know now, Gomer Pyle was Captain Marvel.
So moving on, DC heavily dominated the early comics market with Superman, Batman, Captain Marvel, but Marvel also made a splash with two big stars. One of the more prominent ones was the Human Torch, and just as a point of clarification, because this came up last year, this is an android who was created by a scientist, and his only real flaw is when he was introduced to oxygen, he would flame up. And the scientists introduced this to the general public, and they got crazy about it because they were like, he's a monster, oh my god. So we buried him beneath the earth, and then through some sort of divine justice or what have you, his capsule cracked and he escaped. And he had a little assistant named Toro, and he became one of the heroes. And then there was Namor the Submariner, who is considered the first mutant. So similar to Aquaman's origin, there was a human and an Atlantean who had a child, and Namor was the outcome of that. And at first he was more of a villain. He would come online and flip cars over, and he was always really mad about stuff. But these two, if any of you are Marvel fans, obviously you know about these characters and you've read about them. There was a big event where these two fought each other. And it was this whole big showcase to the world that there's more out there than us. There's huge, powerful beings, and they're pretty much gods. There's a really good book.
Marvels?
Marvels, yes. I was blanking on the name of the writer, but Marvels is a really beautifully drawn book that sort of, again, showcases the history of the Marvel universe from the perspective of a newspaper writer who really gets, and photographer, but he really gets involved in all of this stuff. So now we're moving on from pre-World War II to World War II and how it changed everything. Now we're focusing on America. So much like most of the American media during World War II, comic books made an effort to meet wholesome moral standards by linking their products to patriotism and the war effort. So because of this, readers began to see things like two former enemies, the Human Torch and Submariner, overcoming their differences for the betterment of their country, which is funny because one's an android and then one is from the ocean.
I still say it, I would be a villain too if I looked like that. I mean, the guy just looks like...
Yeah, he looks evil.
He looks like he's gonna start some stuff right now.
Or we saw well-established heroes, Superman, Batman, and Robin, for instance, educating and promoting ways that the American public, particularly the youth, could aid in the war effort. So buying bonds, finding scrap metal to give to the war effort. So it really became less about the fantastical stories that they were telling and more about what you can do for your country. And then finally, Captain America arrived, created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon in 1941. His debut was a call to arms, urging the nation to unite and ultimately changing the culture and the purpose of the American comic.
Now this was the guy that used to eat apple pie and poop American flag before Superman did.
It was used as a catalyst for directly engaging the working class American culture, keeping the morale up by fighting fascism literally in the face, or face to face. As you can see on the cover, he's punching Hitler.
He does that around 20 times.
And very importantly, this cover was done before the U.S. ever declared war on Germany. So Cap declares war first.
Cap hit first. It is.
Although Captain America was great for morale, his stories really helped the American public just have a great sense of the war. They were really racist. As you can see, these depictions of Japanese soldiers, buck-teeth, yellow skin, they depicted Chinese soldiers as really stupid, always swayed easily by the Japanese. I think Russians were equated to Neanderthals or Mongoloids. So it really gave like the awful worldview outside of America of what the rest of the world was like, which when you look back on it retrospectively, it's terrible of us.
This is the era that gave us some infamous covers like the infamous Slap a Jap cover that we don't have a picture of. It's pretty horrible actually, but I mean, you can probably find it if you just Google it.
Yeah, this is also, if you are into Looney Tunes, there's probably a big period of Looney Tunes that you haven't seen, because most TV networks will not air them, because most of the ones made during the war, again, sort of like what they do with Captain America, were kind of to demonize the enemies. There's a lot of pretty racist Looney Tunes comics out there, cartoons out there. So yeah, if you want to see something interesting, keep those out.
Hey, they were demonizing Hitler. He deserved it.
Wrong.
We're gonna
I
hold.
started them in '62 in Virginia. The racist stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you are, probably, where you get to see them, but I know the Brattle Theater in Cambridge, actually, they do like a Looney Tunes fest every year, and they actually play like the ones that don't usually get played on screen, on television at least. So if you're into Looney Tunes, you can check that out.
I saw Cold Black and the Seven Dwarfs at a Trekkie convention.
That was the Subversive panel this month too.
Oh, really?
That one, yeah.
Was it? Okay. That's cool.
All right. So moving on, how World War II changed everything for Japan. There were no heroes or superheroes in Japan that dealt directly with World War II's involvement, at least none that we were really able to find out about. The Japanese superhero was heavily influenced more by the loss of World War II as a way to help revive the now-distraught culture, and it drew heavily from the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings and the atomic bomb and the idea of atomic energy. So, coming off of that, Astro Boy is a character that's directly created out of atomic energy. He first appeared in 1950 in a series called Ambassador Adam, which is an overly complex sci-fi story, which is exactly what Tezuka is known for making. It's a story of two worlds, our world, Earth, and another world very similar to Earth, except everyone has huge ears. So those people, their planet started dying and they came to us to live here, but because of overpopulation and a food shortage, there began to be riots, fights, breakouts, and the world needed an ambassador to quell that and make everything okay. So Tezuka originally chose the name Atom because Americans were doing nuclear testing and everyone was talking about atoms and atomic energy, so he wanted to put a very positive spin and light on it. And
let's see. Pretty much, when they're talking about atoms, they're trying to put a positive spin, saying, "Hey, it can destroy several city blocks, but it can also power your homes. Do this, do this. It can create this. It's a wonderful energy source, pretty much." They're trying to give it more of a positive image. The Astro Boy anime actually, excuse me, hit in 1963, while the manga hit in 1952.
same year that the American occupation ended.
And the anime hit the same year as in America.
As you can tell, this is the American
Last I checked, Right Stuff had the rights. It's still selling it on the website. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I checked.
All right, so Astro Boy kind of leads directly into tokusatsu shows, as well as the super robot shows. So just as a point of clarification before we get started, tokusatsu shows, basically that term in Japan refers to pretty much any show that features a superhero-like character and special effects. And actually, I think the term means special filming in Japan. So that's kind of like the broad term. So Sentai, which you get heard a lot, is actually refers to shows about squadrons or teams. So I think Mike will get into that in a second. So just, I think last year someone criticized us because we didn't differentiate between tokusatsu and Sentai. So there is a difference. One's more general, basically. But Ultraman is really the kind of the first example of a tokusatsu show. So this was a brainchild of E.G. Tsubaraya, I can't pronounce anything, who worked on special effects for the original Godzilla series.
E.G. Tsubaraya, by the way.
Oh, is it A.G.? Okay. And this is actually pretty evident if you watch the original Ultraman. I think even in episode 10, they use the Showa-era Godzilla suit, kind of like modify it and call it Jurass as the main villain of the show. So there is a lot of kind of like reusing in these early tokusatsu shows of like props and special effects. For many like the kaiju movies, like Gamera or anything like that, it's pretty common practice because they were making these fairly cheaply. And actually something interesting about Ultraman that you may not know is it's actually the second in the Ultra series. The show that came before it was called Ultra Q, which Ultra Q actually does not have Ultraman in it at all, and it's more like Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits, where it's sort of like mysterious, like monster stories. And the studios really pushed for more and more monsters in Ultra Q. Like, I think originally they wanted it to be more like pretty much exactly like the Twilight Zone, but kids really liked Godzilla and things like that, so they eventually started introducing like, you know, kaiju and things like that into the show, which leads into Ultraman. And Ultraman's origin story is pretty cool. It's basically the guy in the show who is more or less Ultraman is, well, I have to find his name, is that really down? 1 second. All right, hold on, I can't find his name. Anyway, it's a Japanese like pilot. I think he's in the National Self-Defense Force. He gets hit by Ultraman when he's like flying into Earth, and Ultraman kills him. So Ultraman decides that he feels terrible about this and he wants to save his life. So he merges his life force with his to allow him to live. So what this does is it gives this Japanese man the power to turn into Ultraman when he wants. He's a 50-foot tall guy to fight off these evil creatures. And something that's interesting about this kind of setup of Ultraman coming and killing him and then they have to share the same body is this is actually reused a lot in different shows. If anyone here has ever seen Birdie the Mighty or Birdie the Mighty Decode, which is the more recent show, that's pretty much exactly how Birdie opens, with Birdie coming to Earth and killing the main character, and then they have to share the body for the rest of the show. So it's cool to see kind of how early tokusatsu shows kind of set that up.
So the moral of this story, great Prophet and kills you, you'll get badass powers.
Don't go wandering out in the woods.
Yeah, there were some global co-productions of it later on. Ultraman's been around for a while, so they've done, they aired both the original one and Ultra 7 in the US. I think Ultraman Taiga aired in 2002, and was released on DVD through Funimation, so you can track that down. You can definitely get that. And they also did a Hong Kong comic adaptation of that same show, Ultraman Taiga, which I think Dark Horse released, if you're interested in Ultraman comics and things like that. All right, Ultraman's powers. Yeah, so he is a giant. He's I think he's supposed to be 50 feet tall. He doesn't use tools. I mean, in the early tokusatsu shows, the blocking was pretty bad. They couldn't really do very complicated choreography because they were trying to in all honesty, they had these sets that they had to destroy in the episodes, but they couldn't reshoot once they destroyed the set. So they had to shoot it very carefully to make sure they didn't wreck anything that they would need in another shot. So a lot of it's kind of weird wrestling. So he has these moves like the Specium Ray or the Ultra Slash, which are kind of just him standing there waving his arms. So some of the choreography is pretty bad, but it does get better as they get better at making the show as it goes along. But the important thing about Ultraman, which is kind of a cool idea, is that he's powered by solar energy, and the caveat to that is if he ever runs out of the energy, he will actually die. So he's supposed to have a time limit in the show, which I think is 15 minutes or something around there. But in the show usually it's 30 seconds, and then he'll start. He has this little blinker on his chest that it turns red gradually and starts blinking faster when he's running out of energy. So they kind of use this to like ramp up the tension and conflict in the scenes that like oh no, what if Ultraman dies? Which he doesn't. Well, he doesn't really.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a pretty cool constraint because you don't see that a lot with tokusatsu or even like super robots, especially like they hardly ever have any like real flaws. So I think this is pretty cool of them early on to do something like that. All right. So super robot genre. So this kind of stems from Astro Boy and like earlier depictions in even like Western media, like Metropolis, which is a 1927 silent film, has Maria in it, who's like a android kind of robot they build. So all this kind of leads up to the tokusatsu shows and then the super robot genre. So I think the reason we include this is the super robot genre. Like the super robots basically are superheroes, especially in the early shows. They're like nigh invincible. They have like magical attacks that have like absolutely no basis in reality. Like they're never real actual attacks, which is kind of interesting. So one of the earliest examples of the like actual super robots is Tetsujin 28. So this actually, it's really obviously coming from the tail end of World War II. Tetsujin is actually a doomsday weapon, I think created by the Axis powers left over from the war. And it gets discovered basically and it ends up being operated by that creator's son, Shintaro. So it's remote controlled. It's remote controlled, which is important to note eventually when we get to Mazinger Z. So it's a remote controlled robot, and it basically, they use it to fight crime and things like that. And you may have seen it because they did release it in the US as Gigantor. So in either name, you'll see commonly everywhere. All right, so Mazinger Z. So this is a mecha show that was created by Go Nagai, who you may know for creating. He created Cutie Honey, which is a wonderful show, which everyone should check out, as well as Devilman and a bunch of other really great properties. Go Nagai's awesome. The big thing he did with Mazinger Z. Okay.
Cutie Honey, which is pretty much known for copious amounts of nudity.
Yeah, that's why it's awesome.
All right, so
and don't forget Keko Kamen.
Yes, Keko Kamen, the woman who fights in nothing but a scarf and a mask. Literally.
All right, so this was created in 1972. I don't know if I mentioned Tetsujin 28 is actually 1956. So that's way earlier. But the big thing Mazinger Z did in terms of like super robot as a genre, one is the pilot is actually in the Mazinger, which did not really happen before. Usually it was a remote controlled robot. If you saw in the intro, actually there's that little pod on the top of his head, like a little hovercraft, which lifts off. So that's actually where the pilot sits. So that was a big deal because the idea of a human controlling the suit is very radical. Because usually there's a sort of this idea that the robot itself was kind of like autonomous, even though it was being controlled by a human. Like it was the focus, the pilot wasn't. So eventually, about 7 years later, when Mobile Suit Gundam comes out, we kind of get the logical conclusion of that, where the shows start, at least the real robot genre of the show starts becoming about the pilots more so than the actual robot. So Mazinger kind of started that trend, which is pretty cool. And this show too, it's also Koji, the pilot, is also the son of the creator, I believe. And the other big thing it did is it started the idea of the Gestalt robot, which is like several things combining to create the robot, which you'll see in Sentai shows and things like that coming in the future. So yeah, it's really kind of trend-setting in terms of its mech design and what it kind of did with that.
One more thing that I think you glossed over is that, as we saw in the intro, there's a whole summoning and activation sequence, and that, as you know, with things like Power Rangers, things that we've all seen, where there's this huge, full-minute ideal of getting into the suits and then combining together. This was sort of the impetus and beginning of that.
We need dinosaur power now!
Oh, also,
Everyone needs dinosaur.
actually, I didn't know this, but I did learn this. Kamen Rider, actually, because they use a motorcycle, Golden Guy originally wanted Mazinger to use a motorcycle, like, instead of a hovercraft. But he changed it because Kamen Rider already had, like, kind of taken the motorcycle idea. So that's pretty cool.
Alright, so now we're moving over to Super Sentai. The first known Super Sentai style show was created in 1975. Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, or Secret Team Go Ranger, was created by the creator of Cyborg 009, Shotaro Ishinomori. He's going to be a name you see a lot of. He's pretty much the progenitor of most Super Sentai stuff. He brought in a lot of tropes that were found in these previous programs that we saw before, and also anime titles like, say, Gatchaman, where we have like, the multicolored team, the specific vehicles and all that. That was pretty much combined together in a live-action TV form with Go Ranger, which pretty much, as you can see, it created a phenomenon that's still going even now.
All right, Kamen Rider. All right, so last year I think they got some criticism that Kamen Rider was not featured heavily enough. So we threw in some Kamen Rider to please everyone.
You're a lot of film.
So this comes out in 1971. It was created by Shotaro Ishinomori, who's a big figure in anime and tokusatsu shows. He made a million amazing things. So he's a great creator. If you want to check out like pretty much anything he did, it's usually pretty solid. So it was originally intended to be an adaptation of Skullman. The plot of it, basically in the show there's a terrorist organization named Shocker. And the main character in the show was Takashi Hongo. He gets kidnapped by them, and they brainwash everyone they kidnap. They kind of like turn them and give them powers to use in their organization. He escapes before they can brainwash him, but after they give him the powers, you think they would brainwash him before they gave him like ridiculous powers. But
Maybe the powers make it easier to brainwash.
yeah, apparently they don't do that. But so he escapes and becomes Kamen Rider. And so the show is basically usually about him fighting Shocker. There's also a second Kamen Rider who I think is a photographer who also escapes from Shocker the same way, basically.
I think
so
no.
really bad.
I think the first one rescued him.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's what it was. Okay, so he's also. So I think the manga in the show kind of split a little. Where I can't remember which one it is, but in the show, Kamen Rider stays in Japan, but I think in the manga he actually goes across the world, and then the press photographer version of Kamen Rider stays in Japan to defend Japan. So they kind of have two Kamen Riders working at the same time in different parts of the world. So the stories do split in the manga versus the show a little bit, which is kind of cool. I think, and also there's been over 20 series to date with Kamen Rider. It's been really long running, really well loved. There have been several attempts to bring Kamen Rider to the US. I know Mask Rider, which was an adaptation of Kamen Rider Black RX, aired in 1995, 1996. It was done by Haben Sane, who's the same guy who did Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So kind of was trying to continue that trend into Kamen Rider, but it was unfortunately not very successful.
They actually spliced in some Kamen Rider footage with episodes of Power Rangers to try and set up the series for a Saturday morning run, which it went very poorly. And honestly, it was pretty much a Power Ranger-fied version of Kamen Rider.
Oh yeah, actually, the guy's name is Heat Subman, not the other way around, because I reverse words all the time. Ooh, okay, so Gatchaman. Alright, so Gatchaman is also kind of a show that uses the sort of Sentai squadron elements pretty successfully. So it was created in 1972 by Tatsuo Yoshida, who's a co-founder of Tatsunoko Productions. So it featured a 5-man color-coded squad of heroes, all with unique weapons and vehicles. So the really important thing about Gatchaman is that kind of becomes a real big trope in pretty much any Sentai show from this point on. They love the color scheme, which it makes sense too. A lot of these shows, Sentai shows and especially Super Robot, one of the main concerns in terms of making them was to sell toys, because that's how they got money to make the show. So they did do a lot of things that, like, well, we might be like, that's wicked cool. The only reason they did it is to sell toys. So you have different colors, you can sell 5 different toys with just a different paint job, which is really profitable. So they did do a lot of choices that kind of had to do with this toy creation sort of idea, which is pretty interesting. And they did get some official sequels, I think Gatchaman 2 in 1978 and Gatchaman Fighter in 1979. And it did get brought to the US, but they called it Battle of the Planets in the 70s, and then I think in the 80s it was called G-Force, so no consistency whatsoever.
Battle of the Planets is actually, the dub script was written and acted by a lot of members of the Speed Racer team, if I remember correctly. So there were some ties to the previous show that let them do it fairly cheaply. And now we're back to the Super Sentai stuff. JAKQ Dengekitai, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so forgive me. Jakku Blitzkrieg Squad was created in 1977 by, again, Shotaro Ishinomori. This was actually fairly influential, even though it wasn't the first Super Sentai show, because it introduced a number of concepts, including the voice-induced transformation. So it has that nice merchandisable, like, morpher item that they could sell in stores to get back to merchandising. And crossovers with previous tales, they had the members of the new team meet with the Go Rangers for a couple of episodes to fight off the big bad baddies. And let's move forward to the Spider-Man Tokusatsu show. This is
the most awesome thing you will see all day.
If we didn't have sound, I was going to sing what you guys are about to hear.
We will make you watch this. We don't care.
It's
You have to see it.
so. No!
Sam, you spoke too soon.
It's not working.
Wait, it's totally on YouTube.
I was clicking on
I mean, he's a nerd after all. Don't you think it's possible?
That's one of the notable contributions to this Tokusatsu show, is it really drove home the robot concept, as well as fighting giant monsters. And it's interesting for anyone who knows about Spider-Man. It's a huge departure from what he normally deals with. Things like that.
Spider-Mobile for a while, but it's kind of a joke.
Well, he did, but I'm more talking about, I think in this, he was more similar to Kamen Rider and other things we've discussed. He was more fighting an evil organization as opposed to Dr. Octopus, the Shocker, what have you. So it's more of a global antagonistic focus as opposed to individual pockets of crazy.
Honestly, you wouldn't know by looking at that, but this was actually incredibly important in the line of Super Sentai, because as Sam just said, it introduced the idea of the giant the super robot and the giant monsters, but it was also the first in a fairly long partnership between Toei and Marvel Comics that went on until around the 80s, that led us to get a number of important tales from the Super Sentai line to be outright produced. It was written by Saburo Yasuda, which is pretty much Toei's version of Hajime Yatate. It's where everyone kind of pitched in. So thank everyone at Toei for that interesting take on Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And The actual Super Sentai line began in 1979 with Battle Fever J, which was a co-production between Marvel, Toei, and Tigasahi. This was loosely, very loosely based on Captain America somehow. Pretty much every character was a representative of another country, so we had Battle Japan, Battle Kenya, and Miss America. Not Battle America, Miss America, who was pretty much our Captain America character. Somehow.
Did you say Battle Kenya? Which one's Kenya?
Yes.
Which one's Kenya?
Very correct.
The lion in the back. I believe there's Kenya, Russia, France, America, and Japan.
It was Kusek, but back then though. So we're absolutely sure
It was
that's
Kusek, yes.
It's Japan.
Where did they get the actors to play the other countries?
Everyone Japanese, if I remember correctly.
Wasn't the Miss America American only, or?
Asian guys in
Now,
There can only be one.
I actually have a funny story about this. A dub adaptation of the Super Sentai line, I couldn't find the exact title they used, but it was one of the early Super Sentai titles. It was produced for an American adaptation, so they tried to kind of make Power Rangers before Power Rangers was big. They dubbed it, they kind of renamed everything to make it palatable for Americans, and they pitched it to a TV network. It was soundly rejected by every network. I actually have a quote from one of the executives that I found while doing some research. Here we go. It was rejected with this following quote. "How could you bring us this piece of garbage? You, who are responsible for making Muppet Babies!" Pretty much the partnership between Toei and Marvel ended shortly after Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which was animated by Toei Animation in 1983. I couldn't find the exact date, but it was somewhere around that time period.
All right, so the magical girl genre. So again, we have Go Nagai pretty much to thank for the modern interpretation of the magical girl genre, but it actually does have earlier origins. So at least modern day magical girl shows tend to use sort of Sentai or Tokusatsu tropes, basically where they have transformation sequences, which is pretty similar to Super Robot shows, where they have transformation sequences, and they also have like special powers that they use, which is pretty nifty. So yeah, also again, we mentioned Sailor Moon down there, which I'll talk about in a second. But the actual magical girl genre started like way earlier in Japan. The show Bewitched, actually, which is that American science like sitcom in the 60s about witches, was really popular with Japanese girls in the 60s apparently in Japan. So they decided to make this a show called Sally the Witch, which is about an actual witch. So this is kind of like an early, I think it was 1966 that this came out. And so this is actually kind of like an early show about a girl with magical powers. And then I think also a couple years later they released a show called Secret Ako-chan, which is the first show that featured kind of a magical girl who got her powers from an object, which becomes kind of important in shows like Cardcaptor Sakura and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And also Princess Knight, which is the Tezuka comic, kind of well known for being one of the first shoujo comics. Kind of can be considered a magical girl show. She doesn't really have powers per se, which is sort of like, has like two hearts and like it's like has a male personality and a female personality, which is kind of cool. But this does lead into Cutie Honey. So this is created in 1973 by Go Nagai. I think the picture we have is from Cutie Honey F, I believe.
That was the version that actually pitched to little girls, not perverted men, right?
Right, yeah. So Go Nagai, the manga version of Cutie Honey is way more lewd and violent. It has like gross out humor. But they did.
That's pretty bad too.
Yeah, so his comics, he basically was like the scourge of the Japanese PTA. Like they hated him. They tried to ban all his comics. Pretty much all his comics were like extremely violent or extremely sexual, kind of intentionally to piss people off. So if you track down the Cutie Honey original comics, they're pretty awesome. The show is really good too. It's just toned down for television, basically.
I couldn't find a picture of her. Like, this is the most dressed I've found her. There are all these pictures of her like ripping her shirt off, because I guess her transformation sequence she has to like get naked.
He was appealing towards guys with the show, so she is pretty naked during all the transformation sequences, which he kind of started that too. And the idea behind the show originally, it's about a girl named Honey Kisaragi. She's battling a criminal organization named the Panther Claws. They kill her father. She find out that she's actually a super android with powers that allow her to transform. So Cutie Honey is actually like her main transformation, but she does have other ones that she can turn into at different times.
Each one equally fetishistic, from nurses to cops.
Yeah.
To, it was definitely not handed, girls.
I think there's one that's like a singer. I think there's 7 transformations, like ones in general. But Cutie Honey is the main one, and she also, has the whole very popular thing they do in most of these shows is she yells "Honey Flash" or some catchphrase when she transforms. So that's pretty cool, and it's a good show if you want to track that. I like Cutie Honey F. I know some people weren't a big fan, but it's pretty good.
The original is pretty hard to find, but ADV Films did release the OVA
New Cutie Honey
on DVD. It's out of print, obviously, since ADV doesn't operate as a standard company anymore, but it's still fairly easy to get. You can probably buy it on Amazon for like $5.
All right, and then obviously Sailor Moon would be the big one nowadays, which kind of everyone points to. So that's created in 1991 by Takeuchi. So this is probably the most recognizable example we have in America of magical girl shows. It also features kind of the tropes of getting power from different objects. Definitely has transformation sequences, which are super, super popular. The nice thing that's really cool about Sailor Moon now is Kodansha has a license now for the original manga, and they've been releasing it, so if you're interested, I would definitely recommend checking it out.
And now we move on to the American Sentai shows that actually worked. The first one, as we know, is Power Rangers. Can we get an It's Morphin' time for everyone?
It's Morphin' time!
Awesome, thanks. This was released by Saban, who pretty much replaced all the non-combat scenes with American actors. So
with American problems.
With American problems. So instead of having the standard Japanese setup, we had people going to a youth center, and our Yellow Ranger went from a man to a woman because they needed more girls on the staff to sell more toys. It was pretty much America's first exposure to the Super Sentai format, and it's run for around 18 seasons now. I think this is a little outdated. It might be on the 19th.
Yeah, I think it is. They renewed it. I think it's February. I thought it was supposed to come out in February.
20 years.
Yeah. They were definitely renewed on the last year. They renewed. I think it's Super. I can't remember. But they renewed for a second season. So
Power Rangers Super Samurai.
Yeah, Super Samurai got renewed for another season. So. So it's still going.
And now for the ones that didn't survive. We had VR Troopers, if anyone remembers, that's the one with the talking dog. It combined footage from 3 Toku shows. It was a Superhuman Machine Metalder, Dimensional Warrior Spielbond, and Space Sheriff Shader. Try saying that 3 times fast. Schneider, there we go. My pronunciation's off. And then there was Big Bad Beetleborgs, which had like little kids in a haunted mansion with a creepy Elvis-looking ghost.
I brought this up last time, and I'll bring it up again. That show was confusing.
Yeah, it was
first of all, here, hold on. Let me make my case. It's a bunch of kids who turned into adult people in bug suits. In addition to that, they all had individual superpowers, from like super speed to telekinesis, and then on their off time when they were not working at the ice cream bar they worked at, they would go hang out in an abandoned house with a mummy, a Frankenstein, a vampire, and I think a fish man. Why? What does that have anything to do with being a Beetleborg?
Basically, Sam was just recommending you watch that show. That's pretty cool.
I had the toys. I liked it. It was fun. They brought some other stuff in there. It was cool. We're gonna talk. We're getting to the end of our presentation, and we'll take questions. Right now, we're gonna talk about some current trends in the American superhero comics. There's been some maturing of characters, and I use the quotations around that because some of it is lewd. There's been a lot of hypersexualization of female characters. I think Starfire is probably the biggest example of that.
To be fair, she is always dressed in a very suggestive manner.
Well,
but now she just has sex with everyone.
Here's the thing. You're right. Starfire shows a lot of skin. But she comes from a planet that really respects love and sort of just the wholeness and the wholesomeness of being in love. And during the New 52 launch, she was repositioned as a character who just would have sex with anybody for no reason, no emotional connection. Just, oh, you want to have sex with me? Okay. And they just showed really just like awful,
So they made her
awful
incubus.
She represented a different kind of love.
Yeah.
Non-love.
And comics, I'm focusing a lot on DC right now, but a lot of comics are starting to leave when the new Action Comics where Superman, again, is going back to his more cynical origins of just not being the all-American hero, but kind of a punk who doesn't really know who he is, fighting organizations, everything like that. I would definitely recommend reading it because it's a very interesting take on the character if you're not too familiar with it. And I personally don't really like Superman all that much, so to find a series where I thought he was cool is nice. Attempting to stay socially relevant, a lot of American comics are also starting to touch on political commentaries. I think Marvel's Civil War is a really good example of that. Just the privatization of information and just making heroes register who they are, so the government can sort of control and regulate them. A lot of heroes are for that, some are against that. It creates a rift between the Marvel universe, and it's a really good standalone book.
Spider-Man with Obama.
That's good.
I mean, you can't get much more overt than that.
And then, as I'm sure as we've all seen, there's a current trend of building multimedia franchises, particularly with the movies leading up to the Avengers that Marvel has put out, and the culmination of that movie coming out pretty soon. So DC's trying to do that, not successfully. So we'll see what Man of Steel looks like when it comes out.
We're going to start with Green Lantern. The Green Lantern is one of the weakest heroes they could have done with their entire roster.
I'm afraid for the Flash movie. It's still happening. It's going to be bad.
They should just read the parodic Flash Twitter feed and work with that. It would be more entertaining.
I like the drug called Twitter.
I would pay to see that.
So there's also, in addition to the current trends in American comics, there's also some cross-cultural influence. Marvel's launched several comic series based on Mattel toy lines, Godzilla, Red Ronin, and Stanley, I think 2 or 3 years ago, Stanley co-created Hero Man, which was an anime about a young kid who gets a toy that he fixes that gets struck by lightning and then turns into a giant robot that he can then control. Aliens come to Earth and he uses this giant robot to fight them. It's actually, it's fun. I like the series quite a bit. Yeah.
I'm a robot. Aliens suddenly.
Yeah.
That's good.
And then he also working with the guy behind Shaman King. Sorry, I almost said Shaman Warrior. That's not right. He created a series called Ultimo, which deals with robots and their relationships with people as well. I haven't really read it, but it's cool that Stanley is branching out and doing a bunch of different stuff and recognizing that anime and manga are such a huge dynamic part of the comic culture, and it's great to see someone like him get involved in that. And on the more fun side, Marvel partnered with Tokidoki to create a line of vinyl toys of popular heroes. If you guys haven't collected these or bought one of them, they're really fun. They're $6. They're just really cute, well-made, and they're just goofy. Get it.
They sell them in Newberry Comics if you're curious.
We have them at the Comicopia booth.
That too.
Cross promotion.
Again, at the Comicopia booth.
And finally, Madhouse and Marvel created an anime or created 4 animes for Iron Man, Wolverine, X-Men, and Blade. And these series were guided by Warren Ellis, who's a very popular American writer. If you don't know him, not gonna know him. And it was meant to create an entire parallel universe for Marvel, so it exists outside of the canon. It obviously draws heavily from a lot of current animes, all those structures. So that's definitely something that you should check out. I think they're each 12 episodes long, so it's pretty easily consumable.
And
I guess they're on G4 if you have G4.
And don't forget the Marvel Mangaverse, where they pretty much try to give like a manga style comic with famous Marvel properties for America. which I don't remember how well they did, but
It wasn't good.
yeah, they weren't very good.
Punisher was a girl and like a comic, like.
It really was pretty terrible. I bought one issue and I said, what is this crap? And it
Wasn't that
disappeared.
wasn't that made by the
Disappeared.
guy who would do all those draw manga books, and he was obviously American? So
Pretty much.
yeah.
It looked weird. It was weird.
It was terrible.
There's some other efforts to sort of Japanify different Marvel properties. There's a book called X-Men Misfits that I don't know if you guys have read. It's basically a shoujo attempt for X-Men, wherein Kitty Pryde gets accepted to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, and she's the only girl that's ever been accepted there. So, as you can guess, everyone falls in love with her, Iceman, Pyro. But I read it with high hopes that this would be a really interesting take on X-Men, because I love X-Men, although in in America it's very masculine. Everyone's fighting, everyone has a very destructive, offensive power, and no one really touches on like the human aspect of it as much. There are books, obviously, that do, but I think it can be a really interesting shoujo story. But this book is just terrible. At one point, she's running away, phases through into the kitchen, and Gambit's there baking. They don't say, like, this is Gambit, he can do this. He's just like, here's some croissants, Sherry, and then he never appears again. It's just like, the writers tried to introduce so many characters as possible without any real explanation. So she's hanging out with Hellfire Club, and like, Beast is there, and Colossus.
Why is Beast in the Fire Club?
Well, they gotta try and branch out and sell something. People aren't gonna be buying a comic, obviously.
So that's another thing. So that's the end of our presentation, you guys. We have about 10 minutes for any questions you'd like to. If you're on Twitter, please follow us at the whatever's up there, or use your handles. And yeah, who's got questions?
First 4 questions get one of these comic books. They're fairly old. It looks like early to mid 90s for these guys, and one of them is still back in Warden.
I also have some coupons for comic book if you want questions. So I say you first. What's up?
Yeah, I had known that comic you're talking about. How badly did they mess up Wolverine?
I don't even think Wolverine was Wolverine.
How did you not have Wolverine?
Wolverine had his own series called Wolverine Prodigal Son, where he was in like a kung fu dojo.
It was bad. Oh, I read that. That was actually good.
I didn't read that one.
Yeah, it was pretty. Like, if I recall correctly, it had like a guy who could literally punch you in the soul.
Nice.
Go on up to that comic.
You had a question with the blonde?
Oh yeah.
I'm looking at you.
Well, yeah. I was just wondering, like, have you read like those first like X-Men, like the Marvel X-Men comic? Because it sort of is shoujo, and that like all the guys are all in love with Jean Grey. Like Professor X is in love with Jean Grey, Beast is in love with Jean Grey. So yeah, so it is like it's creepy, but it's sort of like a shoujo concept there too. It's just the only girl.
I have read that, and I think that would be the best interpretation for a shoujo concept.
Yeah,
You just have Jean Grey with the dynamic between Warren and Cyclops as sort of her two romantic leads, and then you could have Bobby and Hank changing, because they both go through such dynamic changes because of their power sets that it's really analogous to being teenagers. I think those 5 would be perfect. Trying to incorporate the entire universe into it, the rest of it, ridiculous.
And maybe no Professor X.
Yeah.
Is it true that they like tried to?
Sorry, so.
Is it true that they tried to like make a redo of Sailor Moon series for like the U.S.? Like I'm not sure if it was real or a hoax.
I'm sorry to know about that. All you need to do is YouTube it. It's pretty easy to find. It is god awful.
It's like affirmative action, like
It is horrific. If you've ever seen it, you will want to cleanse your mind with bleach. It is horrible.
But not the bleach we're all thinking about.
No, like
chlorine bleach. It's funny. All the way in the back. Sorry, I'm just sort of going.
Did they make a live action Sailor Moon series?
Yes.
Yeah, there was live.
And that one was good.
I think, yes.
There's definitely live action. They also did a musical, stage production for Sailor Moon as well. It's pretty sweet.
I have to ask this because it keeps coming up. Goku versus Superman. Who wins?
They wouldn't fight. They'd be bros.
Yeah, she He's got it. They beat Rose. There's no reason for them to fight. You in the back because he's. I was pointing to him. I didn't know you had a question. You.
So if Saban did the localization for that one series in Kamen Rider, and Disney bought Saban, does that mean Disney is now in control of Kamen Rider?
Well, license, I don't know.
They still have the license.
If they still, I mean, yeah, I don't know if they actually. I mean, because usually when like properties really fail, they'll put the license up for sale because they'll like they'll
Spawn is controlling it in Power Rangers.
So I don't know if they have the license. I don't know why they keep it. They're not going to do anything with it. So.
Make cool running materials.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could keep it if you ask.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna go to him.
So I was wondering, on the Mail series, have you ever heard of Super Samurai Cyber Squad or?
Oh god!
Super Samurai Cyber Squad. That's the one where you became a giant robot in a digital world by playing the electric guitar, something like that.
Something like that. Like they were like rock band, and then they kind of went into the computers, and they all became like a Ultraman kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was another show called Vampires.
I remember that. Weren't they cars who were also vampires?
Yeah. I went into a junkyard, got bit by them, and then they became like good versions of them. So at night they would jump into a car and become vampires.
It's like Street.
Yeah. So they turn back.
There are no stupid questions.
That picture of Kitty were her boobs sparkling?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, she sparkles a lot. I don't know.
Well, actually depends on what you watch. If they have the broadcast version, probably. The OVA, she does not sparkle.
Okay, we have time for two more, which is
Not the one. Me?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you think that Japan turned to more of like robots and stuff like that, whereas like America went to like mutants and aliens?
Well, I think we'll ask for it, but that probably has a lot to do with it, just because he was really the first like big anime property, manga property right after the war ended. And I think again, because he was that popular, it was kind of an easy thing to stick to. And then from there, like the toy companies really kind of called the shots a lot, especially with the early Super Robot shows. Like if you look into any of the like mech designs, like for instance, in original Gundam, originally Tomino, who's the creator of Gundam, wanted to make the Mobile Suit Gundam like kind of a more warlike suit, like, and it had to be two-toned, like basically like black and gray, or like white and gray, I think. And the toy companies were not having that. They were like, it has to have colors, it's got to have like detachable parts. Like they're really pushed for these designs to kind of
escapism kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't. Astro Boy is usually what people point to, but
on the American side of things, though, if you read it again, you brought up a great point of the first few issues of X-Men. Professor X talks about that his parents worked on the atomic bomb, and as a result of them being so close to atomic energy, he developed these powers. So again, the atomic energy is kind of an impetus for these mutations. So I think it's more that we use the atomic energy, but we weren't really aware of how it was going to affect us internally just through having it. So that, I think, on the American side of things is where those mutations started to come out of, as opposed to Japan, who just kind of decimated their country a little bit.
If I could interject too, a lot of your early post-war stories were basically Japan assembling a super army and basically reenacting these allegories of World War II. So it was kind of fancy where they could actually win the war and restore the national pride as well.
Right.
So it kind of led the nation towards more of the idea that technology can bring us to the future.
Yeah. On that point, the robots were almost their super weapon.
I think the kaiju shows had something to do with that early on, just because Godzilla, again, was so popular that they really kind of stuck to that formula when they made the tokusatsu shows of Ultraman.
All right, last question.
I apologize if I'm listening beforehand. I have to figure out where this came from. Tattooed teenage alien fighters from Beverly Hills.
Oh god!
What, is that a show?
Yes.
Was it a Japanese production?
I don't know if it was the whole thing where it was the Japanese fighting stuff and the American. It was.
They used their own footage, and that's why it's so cheesy.
Okay. It was for Beverly Hills high school teenagers. The cheerleader, the French girl, the black guy, which was Carlton from Fresh Prince, and I forget who the other kid was, I'm the bad boy delinquent in a private prep school.
Did Colin dance? Because if he
Yeah, I was
dance,
just
doesn't
gonna
matter.
say, was that his like thing?
Yeah.
Like the French girl had a sword, but Carlton was like, I can break dance.
No, he was smart.
He was smart.
He was a smart guy for events.
That's
We should probably try to find
But I didn't know if that was something based off of Japan, or was that just totally American made?
I mean, if Haim Saban had anything to do with it, yeah, I would assume so.
Haim Saban is a master of licensing. He is able to get these properties for absolutely nothing and repurpose them into something commercially viable. I mean, he actually began by importing anime to, I believe it was Israel before he came to America. So a lot of his stuff was in a licensing business, so he got a lot of contacts and knows people who can get stuff really cheaply so to make his own versions.
all right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much. You guys are all great. Oh man.
Yeah. Really? God! I can't watch Beetlejuice anymore.